Hello again. So last time we were working on the UI a little bit, but this time I think I'm gonna work on let's add some ground. So right now we're doing a clear. The clear color is basically the sky color, um, but I am not currently rendering any ground. Um, I still have like a flat plane model and the associated vertex buffer and all that stuff being created from previous implementation, so I should still be able to use all of that. All right, so let's do that. That shouldn't be too terribly hard. But first, I think I need to move this UBO struct that I have here out into a separate header, because right now this is part of players, but I'm going to need it in both spots. So I don't want that to be tied to the players file. So I'll say a new class. I'm actually going to keep it as a struct though, because all the members are public anyways. Okay, let's just make sure that change builds. Should. It's pretty simple. Legal. Well, that's interesting. That wasn't even what I changed. So might be an order type issue. It's strange though. For context, the class that it was complaining about isn't the one that I just modified. It's actually a small string class, which is a custom string class that I'm using in this project. Basically, it has an array inside of it, like a fixed size array. The idea being is that the data is packed together so that if it's part of like a class or something, you don't have to dereference a pointer to go look to a location that's probably not in cache to grab the string. It's similar to the small string optimized string that Facebook uses. I believe in their use case they saw pretty significant speed improvement, even though it executes more instructions just because of the way like caching works and how long it takes to grab memory grab memory from main memory. It actually was a performance improvement for them. I'm using it basically any spot where I think the size is going to be 255 characters or less. Alright, so this time that did not blow up, which is curious. I'm going to file that under a good reason for C++ to implement modules. Because moving the includes around really should not affect that templated function because the two aren't linked at all. It's not using UBO in any way, shape, or form. Okay. All right. Back to the task at hand. So I think we're going to stick with most of the same data that we're using for players. So I'm going to, let me just close these UBO because I don't need those anymore. And I'm just going to make a static objects class to start with. And then I'm just going to start by copying all the stuff that I have over there. I don't think I actually need name though, so that's going to be one of the things that I get rid of. Alright, get rid of name there. Get rid of it there and there. Okay. Oh, got a char star here. Don't want that guy. And don't want that there either. Forgot to put in overloads for both of those. There we go. All right. Don't really have peer IDs. I do have IDs of a sort though, so I'm just gonna rename this for clarity. For reference, the peer IDs are used specifically for players. So the network library that I'm using, and it identifies different connected users with peer IDs. So I'm using that to track the objects in here as well. So that allows me to update the appropriate object. So I can just look for the peer ID. Technically, I could leave that variable as peer ID, but I think that's going to make it confusing later, so I'll go ahead and remove that now while I'm in here working on this. Ah, I took name out, so now I've got duplicate definitions. That makes sense, because I had an overload for small string and an overload for and an overload for char star. I don't need both of those. Okay, great. So that builds. Now I need to modify the layers. So I've got this concept of layers where so each layer is everything that one, we'll say, server knows about. So rather than have everything on one socket, what I'm trying to do is break it up so that different players are communicating with different sockets, because part of the bottleneck is going to be the thread that reads the incoming packets and then sends responses back. So the idea is that I'm breaking that up where there's a thread for each socket, and each socket is a layer. But the client can be aware of multiple layers. I don't currently have the piece implemented where one layer informs another layer of the changes, because that's what would need to occur for the client to get that information back. Because again, the client's only communicating with one specific layer. Now I could handle that on the client side, but that would require me to connect all the layers, which kind of defeats the purpose of having layers, because then it's going to get all the broadcasts for everything. So that's one of those things that I still need to work on. But right now we only have the one layer enabled on the server side. So everybody's ending up in the same layer, so they're all going to get all the updates. So that's not something that I currently need to worry about. All right, so static objects, to include static objects. Okay, I picked that up, so that's good. All right, so let's go ahead and close the player. We're done with that guy. Should be done with layers. We'll leave static objects up for now in case I have to tweak it. Now we need to go over to, I believe, the scene manager. Yep, here we go. Okay, so we have drawing the scene nodes. Okay. So let's split this up a little bit more here. All right, so we've got these main sections where we're in our little render pass here. We're drawing the the scene nodes and their outlines. We also want to handle the new static objects, not just the players though. But let me put a couple comments in here to make clear that these sections are doing players. Okay, and then get another one for static objects. Change this to m static objects. Okay, actually, I think I'm going to move that above the players. Shouldn't really matter because like the Z position's baked in everything, but just the way that I'm thinking about it, the static objects are typically going to be sort of the bottom layer of the scene and everything else is going to layer on top of it. So just conceptually, it makes sense for it to be on top. All right, we do the same thing down here. And the reason why there's two, so I'm going for like a cell shaded look. So the initial set of draw calls are actually putting the shapes out into the world, and then the second one here is it's the same geometry, but the culling's flipped around, and I'm basically just using that to get the black lines around all the models, so that it looks more like drawn, where there's like the pencil or pen or whatever, like the lines that are drawn around the shapes. Because I'm going for that drawn look, everything has more of like a hard line on it, as opposed to reality where the edges are softer. So that's what these second passes are, is they're drawing the outlines to give it that drawn look, at least part of it. I need to still do some tweaks to the lighting and the shader to improve that further, but that is something I will work on later. All right. Okay. Now I'm making an assumption that these like quote-unquote static objects can be animated. So in the animation manager, I'm going to need to go in and add a section for each one of these. Okay, so do the same thing over here. Change this to static. So all these Pragma, Open, OMP, SIMD, like these preprocessor directives, these are designed to give the compiler some hints to try to use SIMD instructions. So if you look at these, I'm working on big arrays of like specific types, so like vectors, matrices, things like that. So I'm trying to course the compiler into emitting a bunch of SIMD instructions instead of working with each data item one at a time. I have not decompiled this yet and looked at the assembly to see if it's actually doing that or not, but that's the intention. That's also part of the reason why this is structured the way it is. I've got all of the data items very vertical, like everything's sort of in its own vector. And the whole idea there is that I'm hoping I can get some efficiency in terms of the way that I'm working with the cache. And also when the data items are together like that, I'm hoping that it'll make it easier for me to use like SIMD instructions. I also have not actually tested this on or compiled it for ARM. I mentioned I hadn't decompiled it and looked at the assembly, but I haven't actually even built on ARM yet, which is my target platform. But there's SIMD instructions to some degree over there as well, at least in newer versions of ARM. I will have to verify which one is in the Raspberry Pi 400. I think it's a V8 based core, but I'll have to double check that. Okay, so that should handle the animation frames for my static objects. Now it's checking to see like the frame indices. So here it's doing like a mod based on the size. So the idea there is that if it goes past the number of frames, then the modulus is going to return 0. So then that's going to go ahead and set the index back to 0. So this is something else I'm going to have to test. I know modulus is like one of the more expensive-ish instructions, but doing this avoids a branch, because I don't have to say like if this is greater than this, then do this. So I think not having a branch and not risking a pipeline bubble here is probably going to have better performance, even though I'm using modulus, which is like one of the more expensive-ish instructions, from my understanding. Now that's based on x86. I have no idea on ARM if it's more expensive or not. All right. So animation's in good shape. Okay, here we go. So this is another spot where I need to set these matrices. I should probably go ahead and copy this static objects M out, because I'm going to end up pasting that an awful lot. All right. The section that I'm updating now, this is basically going through and updating, doing a bunch of math, like figuring out the transformation, the rotation, like all that stuff that I have to have set before I push that. So I'm using a push constant to get like the matrices over to the shader. So I'm doing all of this basically to set all of that up before that gets pushed over. And again, you can see I'm giving hints, trying to get the compiler to use SIMD for anything it can. Now, if it can't figure out how to do it, it's just going to ignore those pragma statements anyways. So there's no harm in having them there. This is one of those spots where if I miss one of these copy paste statements, it causes some sort of weird bug that's hard to find. So let's try not to miss any. I say that after I literally missed one. up here in the for statement. I missed that guy right there. So that would have been a problem because we could have got an index out of bounds error. Now, that wouldn't have happened until the number of players exceeded the number of static objects, but that would have been a fun one to find later. So let's give this a little double check here. Okay, great. I think that takes care of it. So let's just make sure this builds. It should. Okay. So let's go back to the scene manager, and there's a load function somewhere in here. Aha. Yep. Even got a to-do for the terrain. So game state, layers, and we want to use the port. That's what we're using for the layer IDs. And then static objects. Let's say add or update. For ID, we'll say this is 0. Interesting. So let's do a new one. I am going to need to modify that though, so we get the scaling properly. Animation set is actually 1 because the cube is 0. Animation index is 0. Position, we'll say GLM 3. And direction is, should probably name that something else. It's really more like velocity. I think I need to make those optional. But I have them set as const ref. Okay, so then that should allow me to skip including these effector values. And then The other thing that I need to grab is scaling logic. Alright, so I'm going to modify this guy. Alright, now I just need to join the server and see if it blows up or not. When are those new Threadrippers supposed to come out? That'd be really nice about now. For anyone wondering, I actually do have an 8-core system, so it's not like it's an underpowered system. It just takes a little while to build. There we go. Alright, let's fire this up. Okay, I need to work on the responsiveness a little bit, but if you notice when I move the mouse up, you can see that I am technically looking up when I move the mouse up. The mouse isn't hiding properly, which is something I'll have to look into, but I am looking up towards the sky, away from the plane. Okay. Let's take a look at the look speed. So that's gonna bother me. I believe I have that wrapped up in the camera class here. Alright, delta X, delta Y, delta time. Okay. So that is all based on rotation speed, which is delta time multiplied by rotation speed. Okay, so let's go, let's see here. Let's double that rotation speed, see if that helps. Is there anything else I want to do while I'm in here? I think I can close static object. Probably done there. Ground is loading the way that I want it to. Alright, let's look at the mouse cursor while we're looking at this. Okay, so in scene. It is supposed to be disabled. I wonder if every time I disable it, it reappears and then disappears again, or something of that nature. All right, let's add a little bit of extra state tracking. So we've got game status here. And we'll just say previous game status. I'll set that to none for now. And let's see how many places we're touching this. All right, so there's a good number in here. Did not notice that. All right, so the reason why it's complaining about that is because it's atomic, and apparently it doesn't know how to assign from one atomic to another automatically. So I have to call load. I'm not sure why that's the case. That may have just been an oversight in the spec. But there could be a technical reason for them not doing that by default that I'm not aware of. Okay. Suppose what I probably should have done is put functions around that. That would have been the OO way to do it. Set up something like a property and then automatically update the previous status, because right now if I miss a spot it's basically just going to report the wrong previous status. I may decide to change that later. I think for now I'm just going to leave it. All right, so let's see here. I have the previous status. The other thing I can do is at the end of an update, I can come down here and set that. Okay, so it can't assign, but it can definitely compare. Alright, so this is another branch, which is not great, but I'm wondering if that is what was causing the flicker before. Is the fact that it was resetting this every frame, even though it wasn't actually changing. Let's just do find and see if it's anywhere else. Okay, IMQ and Animation Manager. Okay, that should be fine. This is taking a lot longer than I had anticipated. I guess this is going to be one of the longer videos. Once this is in place, though, essentially with the static objects, like if I wanted to add like the sun or clouds or any of that kind of stuff, I just have to have models in the model manager, and then I can basically say use this ID and for the model when I add them and set the position, and then should basically just work after that. Alright, finished building. Okay, that didn't affect the mouse, so that's something I'm going to have to look at more later. Rotation speed does seem better. Still feels a little sluggish though. So I think before I call it, I'm going to, so it's 10 originally, I'm just going to bump this up to 100. And let's see what that looks like. I'll have to tweak this more later once I get some of the scaling in, because right now I'm going with 1 equals 1 meter for the scale of my game world. However, I haven't scaled the player model. It's basically, I think I have it essentially 2 meters squared is what it currently is, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's something I'll have to adjust, and then the run walk speeds, rotation speed, all that's going to have to be scaled off of that once I get that far. But is a little better. Still feel like that might be a little sluggish yet, but that's significantly better. Okay. I think I'm gonna call it quits for this video. So see you guys next time.